Good morning. Welcome. It's Friday, March 5th, and this is Life's Dream number 102, the making of Extravaganza. And here's Corky Siegel.
Take it, Corky. Story time. Well, this is Thursday evening for Holly and I, but it's also Friday morning for Holly and I and all of you. In this kind of format, we could be at many places at the same time. It's quite astounding. So, a lot of people, we're going to call this Making Extravaganza, because tomorrow, your tomorrow, and Holly's and my tomorrow, Saturday is Extravaganza Day, March 6th at 7 p.m. Central. Brought to you by City Winery in all its locations. Atlanta, Nashville, Boston, Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, all that. So,
and they can see it. If they can't make tomorrow, they have 48 hours to catch it.
Yeah, they're giving you 40 hours. But because it's tomorrow, and I can't think of anything else, I'm going to answer the question. Many people, I'm not kidding, ask me, how did you make this work? Because, of course, all of the 13 performers were all in a different location. And, we've seen many of these things before. But they were just wondering, how do you do it? So I'm going to tell you all about the making of Extravaganza. From the very beginning, we start with the chamber blues compositions. And so, of course, the these are compositions that juxtapose blues and classical, enough said, with string quartet, Indian tabla, blues harmonica, blues piano. But then we've added guest artists bringing their own genres to this mix. So, for instance, Ernie Watts. When you hear, like on our last recording, it was Chamber Blues, Different Voices. When you hear the first cut in Different Voices, it's Ernie Watts as our special guest. And you hear the classical, and you hear the blues, and you hear the jazz. And it's like they're all chasing each other around the room. It's really cool. And there's all these different ways of juxtaposing blues and classical, and then sticking in our guest artist in an interesting place. So every time we have a guest artist with us when we tour, of course, I have to write all these compositions that are arrangements to their tunes. I call them sonatas. And so when Ernie wrote, he had the song Oasis, I did a special arrangement for Oasis. And Tracy Nelson, for instance, we did a version of Down So Low, but also many other pieces of hers. So every time we had a guest artist, I had to write a lot of work for 3 or 4 or 5 works so that they could be involved in chamber blues. So with Marcy, we did Cry to Me, we did There Goes My Man, we did Lay Down Sally, which she wrote, and a couple other things she wrote. And so I have a lot of material with Marcy. And with all these guest artists we picked specific guest artists, and one of the tunes from each of the shows that were my favorite tunes that I thought would make a great new album. So we were going to make another Different Voices album. We were going to call it More Different Voices. And we selected all these individual artists and all my favorite tunes from those shows. And then the pandemic hit, as we call it, the damn pandic. And so all of a sudden, we get a call from Chamber Music on the Fox, and we all decided that we were going to do a virtual show. And they had the funding, so essentially they commissioned the beginnings of this video. And at the same time, I had funding for doing an album. It's a little confusing. If you go to Unrecorded Love, you just go to my, well, anyway, I'm not going to talk about that. But I have a crowdfunding project for making More Different Voices. Well, that helped, along with the funding from Chamber Music on the Fox, to make a whole video. And while we're doing that, we're also making a high quality recording for the record. It just was all perfect. I ended up having enough funding to do 7, well, in this case, 8 cuts with 7 soloists. And so that's how the recording, became possible financially. Everyone gets paid really well and very equitably, and it works out really good. But a lot of people say, well, how did you make it work? You had Marcy in LA, and you had Jaime, who was in Florida at the time, and Chi Xuen in California, and Rose in Naperville, and Joycelyn and Elgin, and also Kalyan in Naperville. Everyone stayed in their own rooms, in their own spaces. How did you make it work? So this is how I did it. When I had written, since computers came into our homes, I started using that for composing symphonic works. And when I started writing chamber blues in 1983, I actually had started writing it on scores. But as soon as computers came around, I started using it. So all the works that I've written for these guest artists are in a software package called Finale. And in Finale, I could put in the notes and listen back to what I just did. And this has become my technique for composing. When I compose, I try things. I move a note up, I move a note down, I move it left, right, whatever. How does that sound? How does that sound? And that's basically how I compose. I do it note by note by note on a trial and error basis. That's not normally what a composer does. They hear it in their head and they write it down. No, I wanted to hear it back. The beautiful thing about this is when I'm done with the score, and I go back, by the way, after it's all finished, and I go back and add the dynamics and bring it to life. It's all electronically right there. So when it came time for instance, me wanting the group to play the string quartet part on Oasis, I sent them the electric score. They played to the electronic score. So if it was Jaime, we just took out the first violin, and then the rest of the string quartet was there, and he played along. And each one played along, adding their own part, sending the parts to me. I put them together, made sure they were lined up. It came out beautifully. And one would think it would lack the excitement of the group being together, because they're doing their own parts. But actually, it's in some ways almost better, because they're alone in their room with their instrument. The whole world is watching them. There aren't any other musicians in the room. I'm not in the room.
They're focused, aren't they?
They are focused, and they are responsible for the job of uplifting the world. It's all on their shoulders, each one of them. So it's sort of a cool thing. And, at first, everyone in the group was skeptical until they heard the result, and they loved it. And they all reported, it felt almost like we were working closer together than we ever have. So there's a beauty in that. So that's really how it was done. And in the case of the string quartet, I wanted them to focus on the two aspects, the audio aspect and the visual aspect. So I asked them to not do the video while they were playing. They should just play. And because the parts are written, when it came time to doing the video, they just played the music back. They knew exactly note for note what they were going to do and when they were going to do it. Really easy to lock it in. So the video and audio was done separately, and they lined up perfectly. For the soloists like Ernie or me, it's almost impossible to what's called lip sync those pieces. But for the strings, it was really easy. So this way, they didn't have to wear earphones. They felt free to perform, and they just, and every individual, every soloist became their own cinematographer, their own sound recorder, their own choreographer, their own lighting person, their own director. And they each had this production to do. And then each one of them sent us these glorious productions. And then Holly and I just got to edit them together. I worked with Final Cut Pro, and Holly did the direction.
And they loved it. They had great fun with it, didn't they?
Yeah, everyone had so much fun. so much fun. And a lot of people reported when they saw the initial performances that in many ways it was better than a live concert. And that's what we want. We want to take I always looked at recording as a different art form than performing. When I recorded, I didn't want to replicate a live performance. What I wanted to do is take advantage of this format and the person listening, and I wanted to create a beautiful, incredible experience. And I didn't want to limit that experience by thinking, oh, we want to replicate a live performance. I wanted to create an experience. So that's how I always did the recordings, and this was no different. And here the pandemic was telling us, go to your rooms, be creative. And so that's what Holly and I did, and that's what every musician did. So that's the secret to how we did some of the things. I could tell you a couple other funny things about this. Is if you record a video and you look to see if it's in sync, you would expect it to be perfectly in sync. What I found out is it's never in sync. Normally you have like 25, 30 frames per second. If you're off by one frame, which is common because you're going to be at least off by part of a frame, you could see that it doesn't look right. So if you look really closely at videos and watch people playing, it doesn't look right to start with, even if it's in perfect sync. So if it's 1 or 2 frames actually out of sync, it's like wild. So we're dealing with that whole thing. So so let's see where we are. Basically that was everything. But now let's talk about what actually Holly and I had to do. So here for each piece that we did, we get 7 files, at least 7 files, sometimes 15, 16 files for us to take, put together, and edit. So what I'm going to do...
For each song?
Yeah, for each song. And so what I'm going to show you...
So that's hundreds of files.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. And lots of times it had to be lined up manually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put together a little exhibition so that you could see just a sample of what Holly and I actually did to create these videos. Da.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, first I wrote the score in finale, 1 note at a time. Went back and wrote in all the dynamics. Then played the score and created an audio track and sent it to everyone in the group, minus their instrument. And also added a click track that they could use to help keep the pulse. And if they're all playing to the same click track and to the same music, they're going to be in sync. Then each member sent me an audio track. Each horizontal line crosses a track, starting with Jaime on violin, Chishwen on violin, Rose on viola, Joycelyn on cello. That's my harmonica track, that's Marcy's vocal, and the last 2 tracks are Kalyan. And you'll notice how much better it sounds than the synthesized audio from the score, even though I'm just playing it through the computer speakers. Then, God forbid, every musician and soloist sends me a video, and then I stack them all up, cut them into little pieces, move them around, and Holly is directing the whole thing. And on top of this, we had to deal with the learning curve ball, and was on the phone with Apple and just trying to figure all this out. And that's why it took us 6 months to do this. Well, that was story time.
All right. Bye-bye. We'll see you on the Zoom.
On the Zoom at corkymusic.com/stream.
Stream.
Bye. Bye.